Welcome back to The Cloakroom, our weekly look inside New Hampshire's state government. I'm your host, Grant Bosse. This week in The Cloakroom, we'll talk to the sponsor of a Senate pension reform plan about his efforts to shore up the New Hampshire Retirement System. We'll look deeper into the controversial Northern Pass project. We'll take a first look at New Hampshire's census figures to find out who's going to win and who's going to lose in legislative redistricting, and we'll give you the results of our New Hampshire Watchdog Poll on how much the state should pay for New Hampshire schools. We start with retirement. Last week, the state Senate passed Senate Bill 3 by a 19-5 party line vote. The bill makes a number of significant changes to the New Hampshire retirement system, which faces a $4.7 billion shortfall in unfunded benefits. Governor John Lynch and the state's public employee unions have agreed to increase employee contributions, but only for new hires. The Senate-approved plan increases contributions for any employee who hasn't yet vested into the retirement system, generally after 10 years of work. Wolfboro Republican Jeb Bradley is the lead sponsor of Senate Bill 3, and we caught up with him at the Legislative Office Building in Concord. Last week, the state Senate took a 19-5 vote to approve Senate Bill 3, a series of reforms to the state retirement system. The sponsor of Senate Bill 3 is Senator Jeb Bradley from Wolfboro. He's here with us now in the cloakroom. Senator, congratulations. A strong vote, a party line vote, coming out on the retirement system. What were the changes that you made on the Senate floor and in committee, and what will it do to the New Hampshire retirement system?
Well, I think the fundamental thing, Grant, that people should know is that what we're trying to do is make sure that the retirement system is viable for people in the future, for retirees who depend on it. And so, yes, we're asking them to contribute a little more and to work a little bit longer and to spread some of the terrible burden that the system has created of a nearly $5 billion unfunded liability, both on property taxpayers, where the burden exclusively lies now, and on people that are in the system. And I think we have reached a good compromise. It's fair. It'll keep property tax rates from exploding, and it's fair to employees.
The union and the Senate Democrats still say it's a bad deal for state and local employees. Do you see any chance of getting bipartisan support behind this package going forward?
Well, I would hope that, given the magnitude of the numbers and the unfunded liability that we face, that people will realize that we have to accept reality and that we have to make these changes. The longer we put them off, the worse it gets.
And on the other side, some people who voted for it in the Senate didn't think it quite went far enough. They want to see a more fundamental reform so that every employee essentially pays for their own pension over the course of their career instead of today's workers and today's taxpayers paying for pension liabilities.
I think that we should be moving to a system that is a defined contribution system. That's really what happens in the private sector. But there is a lot that has to go on first in terms of understanding how that works with the state's budget, with cities and towns' budgets, with the bonding authority of the state, and we have to study that carefully. We should be doing it expeditiously, which is why my bill creates a study committee to look at that issue, and I think that we will move toward that, but for now we have to stabilize the system. That's the top priority.
Senate Bill 3 now in the Senate Finance Committee. They'll consider the fiscal impact of the state budget, send it back to the full Senate, and then it'll likely go on to the House, and then, of course, to Governor John Lynch. We'll keep track of it throughout the session right here on the Cloakroom. We turn from pensions to power. Northeast Utilities, the parent company of Public Service Company of New Hampshire, has a plan to bring cheap hydroelectric power down from Canada to plug into the New England power grid. Northern Pass would consist of 180 miles of power lines connecting Hydro-Quebec generators to a converter substation in Franklin, and then across the state to Deerfield. The proposed path would require a new cut through the forests of Coos County, and North Country residents are objecting to the prospect of 90-foot-tall towers stretching across their backyards. The Federal Department of Energy held a week-long series of public hearings across New Hampshire last week, and the New Hampshire House is considering a handful of bills that would essentially stop the project before it even gets started. We asked PSNH spokesman Martin Murray about the Northern Pass project and the public outcry it's caused. What is the Northern Pass project?
Well, the project is a proposal to bring into New England about 1,200 megawatts of hydroelectric energy produced in Canada. That's enough energy to light about 1 million homes here in New England.
And one of the objections people have to this is because we're in a New England power grid, we're going to be bringing this power in over New Hampshire land, and then the power is going to go off to somebody in Connecticut.
Actually, every generator in all of New England is hooked into one regional power pool. The power pool doesn't know any state boundaries. We all, here in New Hampshire, in Connecticut, and Vermont, we all draw from one regional power pool. The interesting thing about this project is it will import into that pool a tremendous amount of hydroelectric or renewable energy. That will displace more expensive fossil-based fuel. And as I said, all of New England basically draws from this one pool. So we'll all benefit both economically and environmentally if we are able to bring into that power pool more hydroelectric or renewable energy.
The largest obstacle seems to be geology. We've got the White Mountains. There are very limited places to go through. It's always been a bottleneck separating southern New Hampshire from northern New Hampshire. And so you get people from northern New Hampshire worried about the impact that this project is going to have on their communities.
Yeah. Everyone, most people I think feel that it would be a good thing if we can have more renewable energy like this. The question is the siting. It has to get from point A to point B, and there's always something in between, and how do you do it? So it's tough. I think we're going to have to work together to find a route that is as least impactful as possible. And what we're finding now is it is very early in the process. You know, federal and state permitting process really hasn't begun or is just beginning now. And yet people are making presumptions about what the end result will be. And I think in the end it's going to be different than it is now. So we have to get through this period though.
The New Hampshire legislature getting involved because of House Bill 649, which would, among other things, call for a fact-finding impact study, prevent the use of eminent domain for this project, and also require an agreement beforehand. So how would this bill impact the Northern Pass project?
Well, our view is that what those bills would do is basically try to stop the process before it ever begins. The people that are supporting and sponsoring those projects are opposed to and trying to stop the project. What we're saying is, you know, there is a process in place. It's just beginning. Let's get through that process, which will help us establish what the impact will be and will likely include modifications or changes to the current proposal. That's a good process that's in place today. It's very rigorous, very comprehensive, and we find this to be basically kind of an end run around the existing process.
It's a long process. What's the timeline between this, construction, completion, assuming everything gets done?
The only thing that is really solid is kind of the construction. We know it would take about 3 years to build. When do we start building though? Is this permitting process going to be 2, 3, or 5 years long? So it'll take some time to figure out how long it's going to take to get to that point when we can begin that 3-year construction period.
Is this going to affect electric rates in the New England Power Pool? Is the hydropower cheaper than the current sources we're getting?
The end result, if this power is indeed imported into the pool, is that we will all be paying less than we would be otherwise, because basically it's all market driven. The price that you and I pay is established by what's the cost of the energy that's in that pool. This energy will go in basically at the bottom. It will be among the most economic and the cheapest power that there is. That means it's going to displace something that would otherwise be there that will be higher in price and higher in carbon emissions.
Martin Murray, thanks for joining us in the Cloakroom.
Happy to do it.
On Tuesday, the U.S. Census Bureau released New Hampshire's results from the 2010 census. Over the past decade, our population has grown 6.5% to just over 1.3 million people. But that population growth has been uneven across the Granite State. Coos County actually shrank slightly over the past 10 years, and population growth in Cheshire and Hillsborough counties were slower than in the state as a whole. That means Coos, Cheshire, and Hillsborough counties are likely to lose 1 seat each in the New Hampshire House when the legislature redraws the political map later this spring. The big winners from the census? Carroll, Grafton, and Merrimack counties are each in line to pick up an extra representative after the 2012 elections. Finally, the results of our New Hampshire Watchdog Poll. As a constitutional amendment to address the Claremont education lawsuit makes its way through the House and towards next year's ballot, we asked you how much state government should contribute to local schools. All of it? None of it? More or less than half the costs? Here's what you said. So overwhelmingly, our New Hampshire Watchdog readers want the state to pick up most, if not all, of the cost of K-12 public education in New Hampshire. In this week's poll, we'll ask you if you want the Northern Pass project to go through. Unwelcome power lines through New Hampshire's North Country versus lower electric rates for all of New England. You can vote at NewHampshireWatchdog.org, and our polls will be open through Thursday. We'll bring you the results right here next week. Until then, I'm your host, Grant Bosse. Thanks for joining us in the Cloakroom.